Welcome to Finding Certainty with your host and U.S. Army veteran, Patrick Laing. Over the next hour, you'll learn from Patrick and his expert guests how to attract more certainty into your business and your life. Now, here is your host, Patrick Laing.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Finding Certainty. It's my favorite day of the week. I look forward to doing this every week. And while we had a gap over the holidays, there were several things that happened. We were transitioning from our new, our previous broadcasting company and moving to this new platform. I will say I'm really excited about what we're doing, and it's good to be back. Between the transition, traveling, my wife and I took a cruise to the South Pacific, 32-day cruise from Los Angeles down to the islands and back for her 50th birthday. And then I was in Dubai giving a keynote speech. I was traveling for business. Our energy business is growing a lot, so I was in 8 countries in 2 weeks. Came back for the holidays, started the year off, transitioned to this new platform, and here we are. So took a little bit of a break there, about 3 months in all, and it just passed really quickly. But now we're back in the saddle, started back up last week. I'll be doing them every week. I've got a list of really fantastic guests coming up. I'll continue to do the monologues the first week of each month. This month, you got 2 in a row. You got my monologue last week I did on quiet confidence. Q is for quiet confidence. And then this week, we're going to be talking about our next topic. R is for revelation. I'm your host, Patrick Laing, and I appreciate you being with me today. Today's monologue day. I typically do it the first week of every month. I did it last week as well, since we were kind of catching up and kickstarting the show again here with a little bit of a break. But if you've been following along with this series, you know that over the past couple of years, we've been walking through the alphabet together, right? Exploring principles that help us create and develop greater certainty in our lives. And interestingly enough, this entire series started almost by accident. As I've said before, I had a guest who couldn't log on last minute with no notice. I had to speak for the full hour, and I shared 3 principles on how to create certainty in our lives. Well, it was a great experience. I enjoyed it. I mean, I enjoy doing the interviews. I enjoy meeting interesting people and hearing their stories, but I really enjoyed having a little bit more time to share my thoughts. Did another one on gratitude at Thanksgiving, and then I started the first of the year. This was over a year ago, almost 2 years now, actually. I started going through the alphabet. I started doing A is for accountability, B is for balance, etc. P was for patience. Just last week, as I said, I spoke about Q is for quiet confidence. You should go back and listen to it if you didn't. I think it's a really important principle about creating certainty in our lives is being more quiet, being more understated and more subtle and more, less outspoken. It's not to say we have to be timid, but we can be wise. Anyway, so that takes us to today. Today we are at the letter R, and I decided to speak about revelation. And before we go any further, let me ask you a question. What if the most important guidance in your life has already been offered to you, but you simply haven't learned how to hear it yet? Think about that. Let me say it one more time. What if the most important guidance in your life hasn't been offered, or has already been offered to you? You already have received it. You may receive it often, but you simply haven't learned how to hear it or how to recognize it. Because whether we realize it or not, every one of us is searching for direction. What should I do next? Am I on the right path? How do I make the right decision, right? That's where revelation comes in. And I'm talking about personal revelation, personal guidance, direction, impressions, etc. So about 7 years ago, I started making a different type of New Year's or resolution, if you will. And I've always done resolutions. I've always done goals. I still like writing out my goals and what I want to accomplish for the year. But I made this new goal to make one resolution, to have one overreaching goal, if you will, and that was to follow every prompting. What do I mean by a prompting? Well, I'm talking about the guidance that we receive, the impressions that come, the direction that comes to us. I made a goal to listen to that and try to follow it. It sounds simple, but it's actually it can be challenging, and because it does require us to slow down. Some of us go 100 miles an hour. I do. I know a lot of people who do. My partner Andy, he can't sit down for a meeting. He has to get up and and walk around. His mom says he was like that as a kid. Just could never sit down and never sit still. And I think there's value in that because we get a lot done. I know Andy is phenomenal, but I think there's also value in slowing down, listening, and paying attention more. In a very real sense, it requires us to trust impressions that often come quietly. And we're so busy, right? We have so much going on in our lives, so much coming at us, the chaos and the cacophony of life, that we can miss those quiet promptings, those quiet impressions if we're not careful. Now, where do these come from? Some call them, they call it the light of Christ. Some call it intuition, our conscience. Maybe you think of it as the universe. Whatever words we use, the principle is the same. Guidance does exist. The real question is, are we listening? Last week I was in Tampa visiting my business partner, Brian Pointer, visiting with several friends. We went back for a conference for a blockchain project we're involved in called Laing. And the very last night they took us on a cruise of the harbor. Beautiful bay there in Tampa Bay, and we went on a dinner cruise. And as we're coming back, they took us over there on coaches, so we're riding back on this coach, this bus. I was visiting with a really nice couple from Dallas or Houston. I think they're from Dallas, but named Laurie and Danny. And we were talking just about life, right? Just about business success and so forth and so on. And at one point, Laurie asked me, what do you consider to be the real secret of success? And what do you attribute your success to? And I think my answer surprised her a little bit. I said the real secret to success is alignment. Okay? It's learning how to recognize the guidance that exists and act on it and be aligned with it, right? Think about that. I attribute that success, any success I've had, marrying my wife, becoming a father, building our business, all of it I attribute to being guided in my life to do the things I should. Sometimes I didn't listen, sometimes I regretted it, but any real success has come from that. Most people aren't failing because they lack intelligence. They're failing because they're not listening to that direction. They're not failing because they lack opportunity. Most people struggle because they're navigating life without a compass. They're trying to do it on their own. Revelation is that compass. Think about that for a minute. And I'm going to define it. I'm going to get into a little bit more detail about what it is and how it works and so forth. But let me start by saying that recognizing revelation in our lives is a skill. It is an acquired skill. We get better at it the more we practice. I was an athlete. I grew up playing soccer and basketball, and I spent hours and hours practicing dribbling drills, shooting free throws, working on my vertical. Now, I'll admit something. I never did get very good at dribbling a soccer ball. I was more of a defender. I could clear it, I could throw it, I could stop it, but I wasn't good at dribbling. I never became a forward, even a midfielder, because it wasn't my skill, even though I did work at it for many years. I did, on the other hand, get really good at shooting free throws, became quite adept at posting up underneath. I'm about 6'4", so I'm tall. And I increased my vertical significantly. I could dunk on pretty much anyone. 360s, everything, right? And so I liked proving the white guys can jump, and there's that myth out there. It's a lot of the time it's true, but it was not me. I was able to work for a very long time and become a very good basketball player. I ended up playing for the Army, and I did end up increasing my vertical about 18 inches. So the point is this, right? Skills improve through repetition. And the same thing is true with spiritual impressions. The more we listen, the more sensitive we become. Sometimes we learn the hard way, right? We ignore a prompting. A thought comes to me, grab your extra keys or grab your wife's keys, and you ignore it, you rush out the door, you're late for work or something, and then they lock their keys in the car, or you lock your keys in your car. And that's oftentimes when we remember, dang it, that thought came to me and I ignored it. Right? Unfortunately, a lot of the learning we do is by failure, right? Hopefully we're failing forward, and hopefully we're learning from our mistakes and getting better. But that is, unfortunately, what happens, right? We realize the times we didn't listen and we wish we had. We failed to make the call. We failed to pay attention. We realized later that small thought mattered, right? And there's an important principle there. Promptings rarely shout. I'm going to give you one example where they did for me, actually two examples, but that's not usually the case. Usually they whisper. Usually they're quiet. It's like the Lord wants you to be paying attention. He wants you to make an effort. And when you do, He rewards you for it. One of my favorite scriptures explains, I think it does a really good job of explaining how revelation works. I'm Latter-day Saint, and we have a book of scripture called The Doctrine and Covenants. It's a series of revelations that the founder of the church, Joseph Smith, had and shared with the members of the church. And in it, he received some direction I think is really powerful. He said, it said to him, you must study it out in your mind, then ask if it is right. There's another principle. It's not always, it's rarely loud, and it's not always even clear. It's as though the Lord wants you to work for it a little bit. So He wants you to pay better attention. In other words, I think revelation is not just acquired. It's not just a skill that we can get better at, right? It's not just a whisper oftentimes, but it is a collaboration. Revelation is collaborative. It's a joint venture. It's a joint relationship between you and the Lord. I was a missionary in Italy for 2 years, and throughout that experience, I learned how to listen to the Spirit. I learned how to get better and work together with my Father in heaven, not just try to do it on my own. And once I figured that out, it was an extraordinary experience. I was guided and directed to people that I never would have met. We changed lives. My life was changed. And it all began, it really cemented and expanded when I learned to collaborate with my Father in heaven, with the Lord. When we can learn that, when we understand how to think, how to study, how to ponder, when we do these things, we think, we study, we ponder, and then we ask, extraordinary things happen. And that relationship deepens. We get better at listening. Our personal revelation becomes not just a gift, but actually a talent. It becomes a strength. Another powerful scripture is in the Bible, in the New Testament. It's in James chapter 1, verse 5. It's an important verse in our religion because it's the verse that our founder, Joseph Smith, read that prompted him to go into the woods and pray. It says, if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, who giveth liberally and upbraideth not. Let's break that down. If you lack wisdom, ask God, because He gives liberally or freely, abundantly and upbraideth not. What does that mean? He does it without chastising you. He's not going to criticize you for coming to him and asking for help or asking for direction. Joseph Smith, as a young man back in 1820, he was 14 years old. He read this verse. He said it struck him like no other verse had. He decided to go into the woods and pray. And out of that experience, he was directed. He received what we call the first vision, but he received direction, revelation, and which led to the restoration of the Church of Jesus Christ. He ended up being guided and directed to start the Church of Jesus Christ of what we call of Latter-day Saints. I'm not going to get into the whole historical story right now in the doctrine or whatever, but if you want to know more, reach out to me. You can look it up at Church of LDS.org is probably the fastest way to find it. But the point is this: the message is that God welcomes our questions. He's far more often waiting on us, I believe, than we are waiting on him. Now, sure, there are always times throughout all of our lives that we are asking for something, maybe even pleading for it, and waiting and waiting and waiting for a response. For whatever reason, sometimes those things don't happen. Oftentimes they don't come, and they certainly don't always come in the timing that we want, right? Whether it's a cure for an illness, whether it's a financial blessing, a relationship fix, whatever, right? Things happen on the Lord's timing, not ours. We all know that. But I think it's really important to understand that this collaboration, this work, this joint venture effort does become, when we make the effort, when we're patient, when we put in the time, it does become deeper and richer, and we get to know him better. We build a relationship there. I do think the example of Joseph Smith is one of the greatest examples of revelation that began with that very scripture, that James chapter 1, verse 5. Told him to ask, told him he wouldn't be criticized, told him he gives freely, and Joseph, as a young man, trusted in that direction, followed it, and had an amazing experience that led to, today, one of the fastest growing churches in the world. A restoration of many things, which is a whole other conversation, as I said. But as a young boy, Joseph Smith was confused. He didn't know which church to join. There were many different churches around him. Each claimed to be right. One day when he came across this verse in the Bible, James 1, verse 5, told him if he lacked wisdom, ask God. It struck him deeply. And so he did something simple and courageous. He prayed. Went into the grove of trees near his home. He asked God directly, and that prayer changed history. Revelation often begins with just a sincere question, whether it's in our heart or spoken out loud. Oftentimes, this is another principle of revelation. It starts when we ask. So, let me tell you another story. This is just recent. I have a friend named Jeff Hadley. We go to church with him. He's also my dentist, and he's a big fisherman. And just this last Sunday, he was telling us about an experience he had bone fishing down in the South Pacific in the Christmas Islands. And they had guides who took them out. The water's very shallow. You can walk for miles, and it's only maybe 2 or 3 feet deep. But he talked about how difficult the bonefish are to see. It's incredibly difficult to see them, and Jeff and his friends would stare out at the water and see nothing. But the guide would say, cast your line 10 feet to the left. Okay, 10 feet further than that. Now wait, set the hook, right? And this guide could see 40, 50 feet out and see these fish and know where they were and be able to guide and direct the fishermen, these fly fishermen, to set their little decoy shrimp hook and catch the fish. And and Jeff commented in church on Sunday about how he would have been lost without them. They had no idea where the fish were. They could have just randomly casted their lines around and hoped to get something, but he said we would have been skunked. But having these guides who knew the path, who knew what to do, where to do it, how to do it, made all the difference. And I thought it was a great metaphor for revelation. That's what guidance is. It's sometimes we simply need someone who sees further than we do and can help guide our path. In our company, we have an app that we've created called the Certainty Connect app. It's our team communication app, and there's different channels for each of the product lines and so forth and so on. And we tell everyone to put their questions in the app. So if you put a question in the app, 3 things happen. Number 1, you get faster answers, right? Because there are lots of people looking at it, not just me, not just the management team, but a couple hundred people. So they get faster responses. They also accelerate their learning curves, and not just theirs, but others. If someone asks a question and someone else answers it, the entire team sees the exchange. They see the question and the answer, and everyone's learning curves accelerate. That's a benefit of revelation. When you receive it, it usually blesses others as well. Not always, but it's very common that there's these ripple effects, same as in our app. Third part is that as they're even new rookies and old veterans on our team, they're asking questions, answering those questions, helping each other, they automatically start to bond. The relationships build. They get to know each other. Same thing happens with us. When we ask questions, we listen for answers. The Lord will always help us. The universe is waiting to serve us, and that relationship grows. It's a really interesting dynamic, but it does take effort. It doesn't happen if we just sit there and do nothing, right? One of the early presidents of our church, his wife was named Camilla Kimball, and she described revelation as though there were 3 different shelves of knowledge, right? Shelf 1 are the things that we know. Shelf 2 are the things that we're currently learning, and shelf 3 are things that will be revealed later, things we don't know yet, things we haven't learned or maybe haven't been revealed. The third shelf requires patience. We want answers now, right? And oftentimes we impatiently demand or plead or wait on those answers. Sometimes it can even hurt our faith when we don't understand. My advice would be, the counsel I would give, and the lesson I have learned, is to wait on the Lord. Be patient, because it will come to us eventually. Maybe not even in this life, but it will come. As we look back on the things we've learned, and as we expand on and accept the things that we're currently learning, right? Sometimes there's going to be gaps, and there's questions we don't have answers for. I heard one speaker say to doubt your doubts, right? Be patient. We're not going to know it all today. It's not going to happen as quickly as we want to. But it does come from those things I'm talking about, making the effort, helping each other, trusting that help will come, and then building that relationship. Not only does it get deeper and richer, it also gets larger. There are these ripple effects where it starts blessing not just your life, but the lives of others as well. I've shared this example before, this analogy. I spoke about faith several months ago. F is for faith. And I shared one of my favorite metaphors, which is the analogy of the seed. This is from the Book of Mormon, a chapter called Alma, 32nd chapter, verse 28. And in this, Alma compares faith to planting a seed. So if the seed is good, 3 things will happen. It starts to enlarge our soul. It starts to expand our understanding, or enlighten our understanding, and it becomes delicious to us. Before we get into any of these evidences that we're receiving direction, that what we're learning is true and real and good, the first thing he says is if we'll plant the seed in our heart and not cast it out by our unbelief, right? Think about what does that mean? It says if you give it a chance, right? Be patient, open your mind, open your heart, and be a ready recipient, right? It's like you're turning on your tuner to receive transmissions coming to you. It's like you're taking the earplugs out so you can listen and hear what's coming. Taking the blinders off, opening your eyes, right? All of these are proactive efforts that say, I'm going to give it a chance. I'm going to try to listen, see what I can learn, right? So it's interesting. These three evidences. It starts to enlarge your soul. You feel it more, right? You can feel it happening. You see it happening. It starts to become real to you. It says it begins to enlighten your understanding. Not only do you feel it more, but you understand it better. Both what it's saying, what it means, maybe the impact or the significance for you, and also where it's coming from. All of these work to deepen that relationship. Then it says becomes delicious to you. It just means you want it more. When you start to get a taste of this kind of direction in your life and this kind of relationship that you can have with your higher power, it's intoxicating, right? It's addictive. You want a deeper, richer, and more all-encompassing relationship, and you can have it. It's incredible. Those are confirmations that we are on the right path, right? The verse goes on, the chapter goes on to say that, are we done? No, we still have to till and water and nourish that plant, that tree, so it can spring up and become a tree, right? We don't just stop. We don't get a glimpse and start to see it and then stop. We continue to develop that relationship, that personal revelation in our lives, the testimony, the relationships, etc., etc. This applies in faith, it applies in revelation, it applies in relationships, like a marriage. It's the same thing. We don't cast it out by our unbelief, right? We give it a chance. We let it grow. It says if it be a good seed, it will start to do these things to enlarge our soul, enlighten our understanding, and become delicious to us. Anyway, we're up against our break. I'm going to go real quick and let you hear from a couple of our insights into who we are as a company. Then I'll be right back and we'll continue the conversation. I appreciate you being with me today here on Finding Certainty.
Certainty Management can help create more certainty in your life with our deep discount health insurance options, even for 1099s, part-time employees, volunteers, and more. Pay less to protect yourself, your loved ones, and your team. Call 888-684-3122 for a free quote today. That's 888-684-3122. Visit us on the web at CertaintyTeam.com. That's Certainty, T-E-A-M, like Mary.com.
If you're a nonprofit in need of funding, we can help. Certainty Management is a cost reduction firm that also helps churches, schools, sports teams, and other nonprofits raise unlimited zero-cost funding. Best of all, you don't have to sell anything or ask for donations. Call 888-684-3122 to learn more today. That's 888-684-3122. Visit us on the web at CertaintyTeam.com. That's Certainty, T-E-A-M, like Mary.com.
You are listening to Finding Certainty with Patrick Laing.
Welcome back to Finding Certainty. Thanks for being with me today. Every Wednesday, 11 a.m. Pacific, I get to spend an hour with my listeners as we break down these various topics of how do we find more certainty? How do we not just find it, but how do we develop it? How do we create it? How do we deepen it? I'm really enjoying going through these monologues, and I hope that as you've been listening and following along, you're learning a little bit along the way. I've been sharing a little bit of insight into my own faith discipline. As I said, I'm a Latter-day Saint. I talked a little bit about Joseph Smith, who's the founder of our church, and how he was guided to go into the woods and pray. He was eventually directed to start the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He eventually was guided to an ancient record of Scripture, what we call the Book of Mormon, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, not the purpose of today's call, but I think it does share, as I was thinking about Revelation, it does share some examples I think were pertinent. Now, one of the stories in the Book of Mormon is a story about a young prophet named Nephi. Together with his family, he helps them cross the desert, leave Jerusalem. They spend several years in the desert, and they eventually come to the ocean where they build a ship. It's interesting because when Nephi is asked to build this ship, his first response was not, well, I don't know how to build a ship. Where do I even start? His first response to the Lord was, where should I go to molten ore? In other words, where should I go to find the metal that I need? He immediately said, I'm listening. I'm prepared. If you look at my background, I have a sign on the wall here. It says, I am ready now. It says the word prepared. It's a nod to an old pioneer story, but I am ready. I'm listening. Whatever you say to do, I will do it to the best of my ability. Nephi built the ship. It was he was guided and directed in how to do it, built the ship. They load up their family. They start crossing the ocean. Nephi had a couple of brothers that were not the best guys. They were rebellious. They threatened his life. His parents, they always wanted to return and go back to Jerusalem, even though we know it was destroyed a few years later. And the Lord had guided them and directed them to leave. All of this is historical. You can go back. If you have questions, again, I'm happy to answer them. But there's an interesting point in this story that I think is worth mentioning. Nephi was on the ship, and his brothers decided they didn't like Nephi, their younger brother, telling them what to do, or they didn't want him to be to have the freedom or the voice that he did. And so they tied him to the mast of the ship. And they kept him there, tied, for 3 days. They started singing and dancing and partying and getting raucous and being rude. And the storm rose up. This great storm was pushing them back several days, or enormous waves. And they still would not untie Nephi. They were stubborn. They were cruel. They did not want to untie their brother. I mean, can you imagine? Not good guys, right? But very hard-hearted. The most important lesson from this story, though, that I've always loved is that Nephi, instead of complaining, instead of shaking his fists at the heavens or blaming God or becoming bitter or anything, it says that he praised God the entire time. He raised his voice and expressed gratitude to the Lord for his many blessings, even while he was going through this trial. Well, the brothers finally untied him. The storm got so bad that they were afraid of drowning, and Nephi's wife, their parents, they were all begging them to stop. They finally did. They finally untied him. And Nephi, rather than having to get himself back in the right frame of mind, he was already there. He was going through this terrible experience, 3 or 4 days tied to the mast in the middle of a storm. But he kept his mindset straight. He kept what we call spiritually centered. And he was able to pray, and immediately the storm stopped. They were able to continue on. Eventually they went to what they call the Promised Land. They landed in somewhere in Central America. Anyway, I think it's an interesting story when we're talking about Revelation, that he maintained his state of mind. I think it's really interesting. Even though when he was going through a hard time, which we all do, he continued to stay in tune. Right? He continued to listen. He continued to communicate. He focused on the relationship, not on the trial. He cried unto the Lord, thanked him for his blessings, and as a result, he was blessed. That kind of faith is pretty extraordinary, right? I for many years I've taught my team what I call the confidence cycle. And if you're listening to this, what it refers to is the fact that we are all moving up this stairway, as it were, as our faith gets stronger and stronger. And revelation, asking for it, seeking it, being worthy of it, recognizing it, receiving it, and following it, right? All these steps they're woven all throughout this process, this confidence cycle process. The first step is usually uncertainty, right? It's fear, it's doubt. We're starting out a new job, starting a new relationship, going through a trial. That's usually what we feel. The next rung on the ladder, the next step up, though, is hope. We go from fear to hope because we hope it gets better, right? We hope we can learn it or figure it out, or the relationship works, the illness is cured. Whatever the trial is, we're still dealing with fear and uncertainty, but we're clinging to hope. The next step on the ladder or the stairway is faith. Faith is the evidence of things not seen. It's belief in things we cannot see. It's a little bit stronger than just hope. It's actually proactively putting that hope to work. As we start to see evidences, and this applies in major trials like Nephi was going through, an illness, terminal illness maybe, whatever the case might be, hope grows into faith, but then we start to see the Lord's hand in it all, and that faith becomes belief. Maybe not perfect, it's not knowledge yet, but it is belief. We're starting to not just have hope or have faith, but to believe, because remember the evidence is from the seed. We start to feel it, we start to understand it, we start to want it more. That belief grows into knowledge. Eventually, whether it's a new job and we're good at it now, or it's a new relationship and we have confidence in it, maybe it's a trial we're working our way through, that hope becomes faith, and that faith becomes belief, and eventually knowledge. Not just knowledge, but confidence. Right? I call this the confidence cycle. You're moving through these steps and becoming confident. And ultimately, you achieve certainty. That's the pinnacle, right? Perfect knowledge, if you will. Peace of mind. What we like to call certainty. It is, in a very real sense, it's revelation that moves us along that path. It's what helps us make it, guides and directs us, helps us along the way. Now, that may be revelation. It may be revealed to us, or the help may come. It may not be from a higher power. It may be from a friend, maybe from a mentor, a group, a resource, an organization, right? Many things can be revealed to us, many insights and lessons and support. It doesn't always come from above, but we've always said that God helps us through other people more often than not. And I felt as though I were an instrument in his hands, helping others, serving others in their hour of need. Maybe they were even praying for that help, and we showed up. And so the Lord uses us oftentimes to fulfill those requests and meet those needs. I think it's a really important lesson to remember. We can be instruments in his hands. We can be collaborative. We are his representatives, if you will, right? We're collaborating with him to bring about good. So sometimes the greatest obstacle to revelation is simply noise. There's too much talking, too many distractions. I remember one time I was on a sales call with one of my salespeople up in Portland, Oregon. I was the sales director for a company called Leaf Guard Northwest. We're sitting across the table from a couple, talking to them about some very expensive rain gutters. They're phenomenal. They're the best rain gutter in the world, guaranteed clog free, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, we rolled price for this lady and her husband, and she said, "Oh my gosh." And I could feel the rep next to me tense up and lean forward. I knew he was going to say something like, "Well, you get what you pay for," or whatever. But under the table, I grabbed his knee and squeezed to keep him from speaking, right? Without verbally saying it, I told him to shut his mouth, right? To keep quiet. And to his credit, he did. And he listened. And you know what she said? First she said, "Oh my gosh." She didn't say gosh, but she said, "That's a lot less than I thought it was going to be." I've always remembered that experience because that rep was about to overcome her objection and respond and tell her why she was wrong. And she wasn't even objecting. Her response was a positive response. I think this is another principle. It's another insight into revelation and guidance. Oftentimes we think we know better. Oftentimes we're so busy talking, we're not listening. Oftentimes we miss opportunities to learn and grow, and just experience so much more, so many more blessings, so much more direction, so much more opportunity if we had just listened. Right? If we want better answers in life, we don't need louder prayers or louder voices. We need quieter lives. We need quieter thoughts. We need to open our ears. Remember, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. That's where revelation really starts to come. I tend to hear the voice, the voice in my head, right? That voice from above more clearly when I'm in the mountains, when I'm out in nature. Some people say, "Oh, I don't need to go to church. I just go out in nature." I can appreciate that. I think there's value to organization and fellowship and just the different ordinances and things that are available through church. But I completely understand the desire to go out into nature, get away from the noise, get away from the distractions, and just connect, right? Stillness invites clarity. And so I understand that. I think it's really important. I think we become more in tune when we shut out the distractions and the noise. We stop and open our ears and listen more and more. And when we do that, we accomplish amazing things. When we do that, we are developing that relationship, right? We're collaborating with the Lord. We're telling him and showing him that this is important to us. And I believe he responds in kind. I read a book by Clayton Christensen. He's a Harvard professor, member of our church, but he wrote a book called The Everyday Missionary. And he was basically talking about how do we share the gospel with others? How can we be good stewards and good neighbors and just be good examples? How do we share the gospel with those around us and bless their lives in the process? And he was talked about a lot of things, but one of the lessons that he shared was he talked about becoming a person that the Lord can trust. Actually talked about becoming a congregation, what we call a ward, but a congregation that the Lord can trust. He knows if he were to guide someone to you and they walked in the door, that they would feel welcomed, they would feel loved, they would feel supported. I love that analogy, and I think it's applicable in this conversation about revelation. Becoming a person, a man or a woman, that the Lord can trust. Because I think when we trust people and he trusts us, he knows he can give us more knowledge, more opportunity, more direction, because we will treat it with care. right? We treat it with kid gloves, as they say, right? I think it raises an important question. Are we, in our own lives, becoming people the Lord can trust? Am I becoming a man, a father, a husband, a business leader that he can trust? I want to, and I hope I am. George Washington spent long hours in prayer during the darkest days of the Revolutionary War, especially during the brutal winter at Valley Forge, when everything seemed uncertain. He stayed connected to God. Revelation does not come to perfect people. Revelation comes to listening people. And obviously there were a lot of miracles that happened during the Revolutionary War that helped us become the free nation that we are. In our belief system, we believe that was the precursor to the gospel of Jesus Christ being restored on earth. We believe it had been lost for many, many years. But all of that, you see all of it throughout the Revolutionary War, throughout the restoration of the gospel, to this day, throughout our personal lives. We see the Lord's hand in it. It's like moving chess pieces, prompting and prodding and encouraging and directing. The incredible thing is the more we listen, the more we hear. Ask yourself this one question tonight. Am I listening? Because when we listen, hope becomes faith, faith becomes knowledge, knowledge becomes confidence, and confidence becomes certainty. And that certainty changes everything. Right? I look back over my life at the mentors I've had, and the people that really have affected me. I just off the top of my head, I can think of coaches I had throughout my sports career. My mission president, Giuseppe Pasta. I mentioned I worked in Italy for 2 years. I remember Giuseppe Pasta was probably one of the most humble, just spiritual and in tune people I've ever met. I remember once we went to Rome for just a conference. It was what they call a zone conference, and he had about 150 to 200 missionaries in his mission that he was responsible for. He was like our mission dad, right? And he would sit down with us without asking any questions. He'd ask us if we could pray together, and then he'd say, Elder Laing. In Italy, we said Anziano Laing. He said, this is what you need to work on. And he'd list off this and this and this and this and this. No questions, no conversation. He just knew what it was that we needed. To the point that it was almost shocking that he could see into our hearts and see into our souls and know that we're struggling. This one's struggling with this problem, and this one's dealing with that, and this one's dealing with maybe homesickness or masturbation or something, right? It was very revealing, sometimes very private things that he knew what we needed. We believe the missionary receives a gift, what we call the mantle of the priesthood. It's like a special endowment that blesses you for the time you're serving your mission. I was in Italy for 2 years. I felt it when I was given that call and set apart as a missionary. I felt it leave me when I finished. President Pasta was most definitely gifted or blessed with that sort of endowment, that ability to receive revelation, to receive direction in his role as our mission president, or the father of the mission, right? I've heard many talk about that experience, how it was just almost overwhelming, how clear the direction becomes. So whether it's as a mission dad, a mission president, or a missionary, or a father, or a husband, or a wife, or a mother, a son, a daughter, a business leader, doesn't matter what the role is. And I do think you receive a special endowment when you're called to do something. The Lord is very much involved. The Lord is very concerned about what we're doing. He wants to be a part of our life. But this is my premise. No matter what it is we're doing, no matter the role we're playing, the challenges we're facing, etc., etc., three things that exist. Number one, we are so blessed. We have an opportunity to be guided in our lives. That's the first. It is a gift and a blessing that is waiting for us. He's waiting for us far more than we are ever waiting on him. He's waiting for us all day, every day, to check in, to listen, and to be guided. Second is, as I've said throughout today's monologue, this conversation, is that the skill of listening and hearing that personal revelation is most definitely an acquired skill. It's something we most definitely can get better at over time. A lot of the time it's when we don't do it and we learn through painful experiences. We learn through regret, but we learn. Much rather learn by doing than not doing. But either way, we're going to learn. So the first is to know that it exists. Know that have faith that help is out there. It's waiting to be given. 2, the more we do it, the better we get at it. And 3, when it happens, and I experienced this on my mission, and I've experienced it many, many times since, when it happens, that relationship grows, and it deepens, and it becomes real. And it just comes full circle. And I was saying how it's usually silent, right? It's quiet, it's whispered to us. We've got to be listening to notice it, to pay attention, and to get better at it. Sometimes it's not, though. I remember a time when I was 16 years old, had my driver's license. I'd only had it for maybe 4 or 5 months. I was driving from Provo, Utah, in Utah Valley, up over the point of the mountain, home to my job in Bountiful, Utah, to go work at McDonald's that afternoon. And I was tired. I'd stayed up too late the night before with my cousins. And I was driving this old beater car, had the radio turned up, my head sticking out the window. I didn't have air conditioning, so I'm sticking my head out the window trying to stay awake, listening to the radio. And I heard a voice, a quiet voice, say, "Put your seatbelt on." And I stopped and looked around and kept driving and turned the radio down. Like, where? Well, because I heard it, but I didn't quite hear it. Right? I didn't recognize it. Kept driving, dozing still. Heard another voice, a little bit louder this time. "Put your seatbelt on." Still ignored it. I'm driving along, I'm this dumb kid, going to my job at McDonald's, falling asleep at the wheel. The third time, it screamed at me, "Put your seatbelt on." And this time I listened and reached up, grabbed my seatbelt, and clicked it. And I was a little bit freaked out, to be honest. About 5 minutes later, I woke up with the barbed wire fence coming straight at me. I'd fallen asleep. I veered off the road and went right through the fence at the top of what we call the point of the mountain. It's the tip of the mountain, right as you come from Utah Valley over and down into Salt Lake Valley. Woke up, started fishtailing back and forth, trying to catch control, dragging barbed wire fence with me. I slid sideways back toward the freeway, hit the lip, and rolled 3 times. When I didn't fall asleep. I wasn't asleep then, that's for sure. But I rolled 3 times, came over, and ended up in the median between on the left side, the fast lane side of the freeway. All my windows broken out, clutching the steering wheel. Fish and fishing poles and cassette tapes and stuff scattered behind me for about a mile. Completely fine. I wrenched my side a little bit from the what do you call it? The seatbelt, but I was fine. That was an example of when that voice spoke up because I was not listening, and he knew I needed it. Thank goodness. I have a very good friend who fell asleep at the wheel and is in a wheelchair now. She works with us. Don't know why I wasn't hurt. I probably couldn't have handled the trial she has gone through in the last 30 years, almost 20 years at least. I wasn't ready for that kind of trial maybe, but I was protected. I think she's much stronger than me, but I'm grateful for that revelation, that guidance that I received. I'm grateful for this knowledge. It is something that I continue to learn and understand better every day. The 3 shelves, right? I can look back on the things I've learned, the things I felt, the things I understood, the things I've desired and wanted that have grown for me, like the seed. I can remember that first shelf and draw from the things that have occurred, like this experience. Another time I was going through a divorce, I was praying and thinking and talking, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And I heard a voice say, shut up and listen. He said, be still and listen. This time yelled at me again. And I did. And as soon as I stopped talking, revelation and ideas and answers flowed into my mind. Those are a couple of experiences that I've had in my life that really stood out to me. And those are on that bottom shelf for me. They're experiences I've had. I've had many others, but 2 examples of things I look back on. There's many things that I continue to learn every day. And there's things I'll learn someday in the future. If I ever have doubts or worries, I doubt my doubts. I don't get hung up on what I don't yet know. One of the most powerful lessons I ever taught, and I think it's applicable here, and I'll end with this. I know we're up against the end of the show, but one of the most powerful lessons and reminders that I've ever received was that we have a choice every day to be spiritually centered or temporally centered. Spiritually centered means we lean to that side. If we have a question, we have a concern, we're going through a trial, something bad happens, we become more in tune, more collaborative, and more humble. It's like we tune our frequency and become more in tune, more receptive, and when we do that, it grows. To respond temporally, we just change the channel or we check out, right? Think of it when you get up out of bed and you stub your toe. You can let that ruin your whole day. Maybe you spill on your shirt. Let it ruin your whole day. You get cut off in traffic. You can let it ruin your entire experience and become more noise and more distracting and more debilitating. Or you can stay spiritually centered. It's like you come to this fork in the road and you can go right or go left. You have that choice. I've referred to it in the past as like an escalator. You come to an escalator like you're in a mall. Maybe you're at JCPenney or something, or Nordstrom's, and there's an escalator. You can choose to go up or you can choose to go down. When we respond to things temporally, we're going down. We're sinking lower. We're shutting out the direction we could have. We're getting angry or bitter or sad, depressed. When we go up, we choose to reach higher, to listen more, to trust. Even if we can't quite see the end, the forest for the trees, we see it. Is that a light at the end of the tunnel or is it a train, right? Even when we don't have all the answers, that top shelf hasn't been revealed yet. When we reach up or go up, that's when we become spiritually centered. We become more receptive, not less. A speaker I heard once referred to this, and he said we should literally go in our minds to Gethsemane, the garden where Christ suffered for our sins. He suffered for our hurts. He said we should go in our minds to Gethsemane and picture what he felt. Gives us a chance to gain a glimpse of what he did for us times infinity, right? We stub our toe, we know what it feels like to hurt, and we go to Gethsemane. We choose to become more in tune, to connect rather than disconnect. Right? I love that. We could unpack this more. We could talk about this for another 2 hours, but I love that idea. Christ says to come unto him. How do we come unto him without understanding him? Without listening and being in tune to him? How do we achieve that without staying connected and without coming to have empathy and appreciation for who he was and what he did? When those things happen, those little forks in the road, those two escalators occur multiple times throughout our days, do we go up or do we go down? Do we picture him and what he did for us, or do we shut it out and shake our fists at the heavens? My conjecture is that if we choose the former, we reach up, we connect, we envision, we gain that glimpse and value it. It changes everything. As I said, because we do this, because we listened, because we dug deeper and reached up rather than just giving up, hope becomes faith. Faith becomes knowledge. Knowledge becomes confidence. And confidence becomes certainty. Perfect certainty. No matter what we're going through, no matter the trials we're facing, no matter what's hitting us from all sides even. This can apply in the littlest thing like stubbing our toe all the way up to losing a loved one, the most devastating thing that could have happened. This can help, and we can be guided through the process. So I could go on, but I won't. Just know that as confidence becomes certainty, that certainty becomes so much more. It becomes a snowball effect that grows and picks up speed and gets bigger in our lives. That certainty changes everything. We're out of time. Thank you for joining me today on Finding Certainty. We appreciate it if you'll share the show with others. Put out the link to the podcast on your social media. Like, share, comment. Most of all, remember, certainty is out there. You can find it, and we can help. Thanks for being with me today. I wish you the very best. Life is wonderful. If you listen, be guided throughout it, on good days and bad days, it can be even better. Have a great day, everybody. Take care.
Thanks for tuning into today's episode of Finding Certainty. We hope you've gained some more insight into how to create more certainty in your own business or nonprofit. Join us next week for another taste of the Certainty Experience. Until then, we wish you greater certainty in all that you do.